All right, here we are. All right, so let's get everything open and we'll get started. Okay, hold on. What the hell is it doing? Okay. All right, hold on. Let me just get Moodle open. All right, so last time when we left off, we were looking at the different functions of money in the economy. So we're going to pick it up from there, and we also have some other interesting things to look at. For example, I have a presentation about historical notes and coins throughout the world, including the United States, and then we've also got some videos that we want to look at today about the history of money itself. So we started out by noting last time that money is really any asset that performs the following functions. It has to act as a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. Now, throughout history, of course, as you know, money has taken many different forms. Of course, at the moment, we're using paper money for the most part, but throughout history, that wasn't normal. In fact, paper money is a relatively new development. Although interestingly enough, the Chinese started using paper money in the 1300s, but it took a very long time before Western Europe started having paper money of its own. In fact, Marco Polo mentions it in one of his books that he saw the Chinese using paper money, and he was very surprised to see it, of course. But it was backed by silver, and so paper money and silver circulated side by side in China, and they were very careful about making it difficult to counterfeit the paper money. And so the quality was such that many examples of it still survive. In fact, let's take a quick look real fast at the internet and see if we can find a picture of it. Let's see. Hold on one second. All right, here we go. No, that's not what I wanted. Oh, wait, here we go. So this is Chinese, it's called Chinese Paper Money Silkroad.com. Now, I'm not sure what year this is, but some of this, as you can see, this is going back quite a ways. Oh, my mistake. They went back even further than the 1300s. They're talking about 618 to 907 AD. Paper money was issued around 800 AD. And so that was something that was invented in China. And so when Marco Polo ended up in China during this period, 1115 to 1234, these notes were actually backed by silver. And so they were widely circulated because everyone understood that anytime they chose, they could trade these notes for cash or silver. And so, but of course, in order to prevent counterfeiting, the notes had to be produced of a very high quality, but also, as you can see, the penalties for counterfeiting were quite severe. In fact, they mention here, in 1183, a printer who was found guilty of counterfeiting banknotes was sentenced to death. Okay, so they were serious. And so it's important when there's paper money to make it as difficult as possible to avoid counterfeiting. That has always been a constant problem. In fact, if you look at the paper money early issued during the colonial days of the United States, you'll notice something very interesting. In fact, let me see if I can find a picture of one. Here it is. Here's an example of what I mean. Now, this is during the just around the Revolution. And you notice how it still says 5 shillings because we're still using English money at the time. And if you notice at the bottom here, look at it very carefully, it says to counterfeit is death. It actually says that on this 5 shilling note. They wanted you to know that they didn't want any counterfeiting to happen. And in fact, they were so serious about it that they had to make counterfeiting punishable by death. Because it was so easy to counterfeit this paper money that the only way they could control it is to have the death penalty for counterfeiters. And so, not that it worked, people are still counterfeiting all over the place, but that's how seriously this problem was. And so later on, eventually that got taken off and was replaced by "In God We Trust," a little bit of a nicer slogan than "To counterfeit is death." But you can see the problem here. It's just a regular piece of paper and it's been printed in a professional print shop, but still, it wouldn't take that much for somebody to reproduce this on their own printer. And so counterfeiting was a constant problem. And at the same time, as we've already discussed, there just wasn't enough silver or gold in circulation to produce enough coins. And so the colonies had to resort to using foreign coins and also paper money, which could easily be counterfeited. Okay, so remember, to counterfeit is death. And so the Chinese had to have the same thing, because in those days it also wouldn't have been terribly difficult to reproduce these notes. They were just printed on regular paper. And so, and now Marco Polo, like I said, did see them using paper money. So he mentioned it. Paper money is introduced as a new idea to Western civilization by Marco Polo in a chapter of his travels entitled "How the Great Khan Causes the Bark of Trees Made into Something Like Paper to Pass for Money All Over His Country." So now this is around 12, this is definitely the 13th century. Now it says here, the great Chinese civilization of that period, the Yuan dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan in 1271, is credited with sending many of China's innovations to the Western world through Marco Polo's writings. Its cuisine, silk, spices, gunpowder, rockets, and other weapons of war are among the most famous, but among the most constructive and destructive throughout Western history, depending on whose hands it was in, was the use of paper money as a substitute for what had been real money in other civilizations, namely gold and silver. Gold and silver are still acknowledged as real money in every civilized nation, as well as recognized commodities. But the idea of paper money was introduced as a new idea to Western civilization by Marco Polo in a chapter of his travels. Okay. So that was something that had never been heard of in the West, paper money. And it says here, all these pieces of paper are issued with as much solemnity and authority as if they were pure gold and silver. And on every piece, a variety of officials whose duty it is have to write their names and to put their seals. When all is prepared duly, the chief officer deputed by the Khan smears the seal entrusted to him with vermilion, which is red, and presses on the paper so the form of the seal remains imprinted on it in red. The money is then authentic. Now, down here, somewhere along the way, he mentions, I think, that counterfeiting. Well, anyway, somewhere yeah. So anyway, this is during the 13th century, but in the West, the idea of paper money took a long time to catch on. And in fact, why don't we find out now, when was paper money first introduced in Western Europe? According to this, 1661, the first banknotes were issued in 1661 by the Bank of Stockholm, and which went bankrupt for lack of sufficient reserves. Banknote issues only became well established in the 18th century in Europe, which sounds about right. But so the idea, it took a long time. This is like 400 years after Marco Polo for the idea to catch on. And of course, the real problem with it was that counterfeiting, of course. It's just too easy to counterfeit paper money, or at least it was at the time when printing technology was very primitive. So gold and silver primarily served as the primary form of money throughout most of Western history, up until maybe the last 100 years or so, 150 years, whatever. But then it became much more common to use paper money because it has a lot of advantages. But and of course, you notice that the dollar bills, the tens, the hundreds, they have to be redesigned periodically because counterfeiting is just a constant problem even now. And so, like, for example, if you look at the $100 bill, it has a lot of items hidden in it that are just counterfeiters. Let's say they've got a list here of all the things that are hiding on here to prevent counterfeiting. Oh, okay. Well, I'm not sure if this is what I wanted, but anyway, but there's a lot of things hiding in there that are meant to prevent counterfeiting, like this blue seal, for example, or this picture of the Liberty Bell down here. Oh, here it is. Here's some other, they're mentioning some of these now. Color shifting ink, bell in the inkwell. Tilt the note to see the color shifting bell in the copper inkwell change from copper to green. The watermark, if you hold it up to the light, you can see a tiny little picture of Benjamin Franklin. All of this is done to foil counterfeiters because it's just too easy to print this up on modern printers and pass it off as the real thing. And the ultimate defense against counterfeiting, by the way, is not so much the design of the bill, but the materials that it's made out of. Because in the US, paper money is not actually made out of paper. It's made out of 25% linen and 75% cotton. And the point of that is that it's very difficult to reproduce it, almost impossible, really. And so you can have the best design in the world, but if the paper isn't right, everyone will know that your notes are counterfeit. So the actual paper is basically the first line of defense against counterfeiting. The rest is just to make sure that it's hard to reproduce it. Yes, Fernando.
So you're saying that the bill of like any bill of money, it's not actually paper. It's made out of those two pieces of material.
Right, it's not paper at all. In fact, you know how you can tell? Have you ever left a dollar bill in your jeans when you were and threw them into the washing machine?
Yeah.
And so what happened to it when it came out?
Like I was surprised that the money was still there, but it was just like washed a bit, I guess. But
Yep.
it was in
And
good
there's a
shape.
reason, for that because it's made out of linen and cotton. In fact, similar to what your jeans are made out of. So, in other words, if it were paper, and I'm sure you left paper in your wallet too, or I mean, in your jeans when you washed them, and it came out, it was all shredded up, wasn't it?
Yes, that's exactly that.
So
Exactly.
that's one way you can tell that paper or so-called paper money isn't really paper at all. I see a couple other people had their hands up. Does anyone want to say something? Oh, okay. Yes, and so you can find all this. The government has all of this wonderful information on various websites. Here we have the U.S. currency education program. It says here that they're so strong that it would take 4,000 folds to tear a banknote. Yes, go ahead.
So then my last question is, why was the bill constructed as like a that it looks like a paper pretty much? If it's not actually paper, but why does it look
Well,
like?
it has to be useful. I mean, it has to be easy to handle it. It has to fit in your wallet nicely. It has to be possible to, take them apart from each other. They can't be sticking to each other, for example. It has to be convenient for something to be used as a form of money. So they wanted it to be as useful as it could be, and yet difficult to reproduce. So this is what they hit up on. In fact,
Uh,
supposedly only a couple of people in the whole country know the actual recipe for the paper, and they never travel together because no, we don't want anything to happen to them. It's a very, very closely guarded secret exactly how the paper is made. So
okay, thank you.
okay. Now you may know that in some countries, like in Canada, they've gone one step further. and they've started making money out of plastic. Now you might say, what do you mean plastic? It can't be plastic. Well, it's a very soft plastic. If you've never held it in your hands, it's hard to explain it, but it's a very soft plastic and it fits in your wallet. It folds just like paper, but it's plastic. And so it's one of those things where you can't look at a video, you can't look at a picture of it. You have to feel it in your own hands to fully appreciate how cool this really is. So we don't have that yet. I'm sure it's coming. But the advantage to this type of money is that not only is it even more difficult to counterfeit, but it doesn't wear out. Our notes wear out very quickly. In fact, the average dollar bill needs to be replaced every 18 months because it gets worn down. These plastic notes, they'll probably last forever. I mean, and you can do anything you want with them. You can fold them up, you can put them in your wallet, but it's plastic. There's no paper in there at all. So if you're really dying to know, you could probably go to the web and find a company that deals in foreign currencies and maybe buy a Canadian dollar bill or something and see what it looks like. But they're actual plastic. It's very soft plastic. It's almost shocking to feel it because it's so, it folds like paper, but it isn't. Okay. And so I think that's the wave of the future. And of course, it's still full of all these details that are designed to prevent counterfeiting in spite of the plastic. They're very careful about this. And it's not just Canada. I mean, that's just other countries have it too. So I think it's just only a matter of time before we get that in the US. But anyway, so let's get back to this for a second. Now, remember, we discussed the three functions of money: the medium of exchange, which means it has to be easily standardized, universally acceptable, and divisible into smaller units so we can make change. And then we saw the case of the Spanish silver dollar, where out of sheer desperation, the colonists would make change by cutting it up into 8 equal sized pieces. It's like cutting up a pizza. And each of these individual slices was called a bit. And when we did start having enough silver to make our own coins, we naturally enough, the coins reflect this because we're one of the few countries that actually has quarters. Okay, most countries, if you notice, for example, like in the Eurozone, their coins go from 1 cent, 2 cent, 5, 10, 20, and 50. They don't have a quarter. The US has a quarter because of this experience with bits. So in other words, 2 bits would have been worth 25 cents or a quarter. All right, so that's one of the reasons why we have a quarter, because of this, our history with these coins being cut up into 8 bits. So anyway, obviously money has to be easy to carry, although we saw an example where that was not true, durable. That would be our stone money of Yap, which they make it work somehow, but they do also accept dollars on Yap. Okay, it is, after all, the 21st century. Somewhere along the way, they realized, even a tiny country like this, most likely their revenues are coming from tourism. And for any country that's dependent on tourism, most likely they'll take US dollars because, let's face it, the majority of their visitors are going to be Americans. Or if not, other countries, like in Western Europe, where they can easily exchange their currency for the dollar. So these are interesting types of examples of money, but money also has to have a store of value. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this last time. Again, during the colonial period, when there just wasn't enough metal to go and produce coins, the tobacco states like Virginia and Kentucky, I guess, they use tobacco leaves as a form of money. Now, that represents one major problem. Tobacco leaves don't last forever. They do eventually, they spoil. Okay, and so they were not a particularly useful form of money, but for short periods of time, it was better than nothing. And so tobacco growing states briefly used tobacco leaves as a form of money. In fact, maybe we can get some more details on here. Maybe we've even got some, oh, I don't think they understood what I meant. Oh, here it is. Tobacco is money. Because of the scarcity of specie, which means gold and silver, Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina used tobacco as currency throughout most of the colonial period. In 1619, the Virginia legislature rated high quality tobacco at 3 shillings, and in 1642 made it legal tender. So that goes back even further than I realized. They were going back way into the early 17th century. And so sharp fluctuations in tobacco prices led Virginia in 1727 to adopt a system of tobacco notes, certificates issued by inspectors of government warehouses. So this was actually paper money that was backed by tobacco. If, in other words, you could use that certificate to trade it in for tobacco anytime you needed to. And so, of course, the problem with tobacco, like I said, apparently the leaves, no matter how well they're stored, they don't last forever. They do eventually spoil. And so it wasn't a particularly successful form of money, but you know, what were they going to do? You know, there simply wasn't enough coinage, and so this is what they came up with as a substitute. Interesting. I mean, you know, when you have an issue like this, there's just not enough coins floating around. Well, you do whatever you find convenient. This is the most convenient alternative that they could come up with. But anyway, so store of value, that means the tobacco money was not a particularly good store of value. And then, of course, it makes savings possible and the liquidity, which we've already discussed. And then unit of account simply means we can express prices in terms of whatever currency we're using. So everything in the United States has a price measured in dollars, without which we would have to resort to barter, where people are trading goods directly for each other. And you can imagine how awkward that would be. So money has a lot of useful properties. And so, as I mentioned too, if you're really interested, you can go to the San Francisco Fed's website and look at pictures of historical notes and coins.